A knock at the door. 3 barefoot children in the snow. No mother, no father. Just a torn letter tucked inside a dead man's boot and a name. Nathan Cole. A man who had shut the world out for 5 long years. A man carrying guilt he thought he'd never outrun. What happens when the one person a dying father trusted is the one person who believed he had nothing left to give? Stay with me, because this story doesn't just break your heart, it rebuilds it. Welcome, this channel is your campfire in the wild. We tell stories of the Old West, of cowboys and outlaws, of love that survives the harshest winters, of mothers who never stop fighting, and of strangers who become family when the world turns cold. Today's story reminds us, a promise kept in the darkest hour can become the foundation of an entire life. If this story moved something in you, don't let it pass quietly. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what town you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe so you never miss the next one. The fire's always burning here.
The knock came 3 times. Each one was loud and clear, the kind of knock from someone who believes knocking is serious business. Nathan Cole put his coffee cup down and just listened. Nobody ever came knocking on his door, not in a long time. Not since his Ellen passed on 5 winters back, which was when he pretty much hung a closed sign on the world. He wiped his palms on his trousers and walked across the room, his boots making heavy sounds on the wood planks. The first thing that hit him when he opened the door was the biting cold. And then he saw them. 3 little ones standing right there on his porch in all that snow. The one in front was a girl, maybe 10 years old. She stood protectively in front of the other 2, like a little mother hen with her jaw set firm and her eyes locked right on his. The bottom of her dress was ripped and soaked clean through, and her boots, if you could call them that, were busted wide open at the seams. Her dark red hair was a tangled mess across her face, and her hands were chapped and raw from the wind. Tucked behind her was an even smaller girl, about 6, hugging a little rag doll with all her might. She never looked up, didn't so much as twitch, just stood there shaking, pressed up tight against her sister. And in the oldest girl's arms was a little boy, no older than 4. His face was all red, and his breathing was fast and shallow. His small frame was racked with a cough that sounded like it came from a deep, broken place. Nathan just stood there and stared. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The oldest girl was the first to talk. "You, Mr. Calloway?" "No, Cole. Nathan Cole." Her voice was tiny but as steady as a candle flame in a breeze. "I am. My papa told me to find you. He said if anything went wrong, we were to come straight here." Nathan's jaw clenched up. He looked out past them, his eyes searching the wide-open white landscape that went on forever. There was no horse, no wagon, and no tracks but the little ones they'd made, which the snow was already busy covering up. "Where is your papa?" The girl's lips formed a tight line. She didn't say a word. Instead, she adjusted the little boy in her arms, dug into her dress pocket, and pulled out a bundle wrapped in some cloth. She held it out to him with both of her small hands. The little girl behind her let out a whimper. Nathan took the bundle from her gently. The cloth had dark stains on it and was frozen solid. He slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a man's boot, made of worn-out leather. The sole was cracked all the way through. Tucked deep inside was a tightly folded piece of paper. "This letter was in Papa's boot," the girl said, her voice finally starting to shake. She bit her lip, trying to stay strong, but she couldn't. He told me to bring it to you if you didn't make it back." The little boy coughed again, a rattling sound from deep in his chest. The smaller girl hid her face in her sister's dress and began to cry. But it was a quiet, soft cry, the kind you learn when you figure out that making a lot of noise doesn't do any good. Nathan's throat felt as dry as a desert. He looked from the boot to the letter, and then to the 3 children shivering in the snow. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara. Clara Dawson." "And them?" "My sister, Lily. She's 6. And my brother Jamie. He's 4. He's awful sick. He got sick on the second day. The second day of what? Of walking. Nathan's gaze dropped to her feet. He could see the blisters on her heels and the little spots of blood she'd left in the snow. How far did you all walk? 4 days, I think. Maybe 5. I lost track. All alone? In this kind of weather? She just nodded. Jamie coughed again, even harder this time, and Clara held him tighter. Her arms were trembling now, not from being cold, but from the strain of carrying him for so many miles. "Can we come inside?" she asked. "Please, Jamie needs to get warm." Nathan immediately stepped back from the door. "Get in here, all of you, right now." Clara moved past him, fast but steady. Lily followed right behind, her eyes glued to the floor, that rag doll clutched to her chest. Nathan slammed the door shut against the howling wind and went straight to the fireplace. The fire had burned down to embers. He grabbed some logs and quickly built it back up, his hands moving on their own. "Set him down here," Nathan said, yanking a blanket from a nearby chair and spreading it by the hearth. Clara knelt and gently laid Jamie on the blanket. The little boy's eyes were barely open, and his skin was hot as a stove. His breaths were coming in quick, shallow pants. "How long has he been like this?" Nathan asked. "He started coughing the second night. By the third day, he couldn't walk no more. So I carried him." Nathan just looked at her. A 10-year-old girl who had carried her 4-year-old brother through a Wyoming blizzard for 2 whole days. "You carried him?" "He's my brother," she said, as if that was the only explanation anyone would ever need. And maybe it was. Nathan took another blanket and wrapped it around Lily, who hadn't spoken a single word. She was just sitting by the fire, rocking back and forth a little, holding on to that doll. Her eyes had a glassy, far-off look, the kind you see in a child who has witnessed things they never should have. "Lily," Nathan said softly, "are you hungry?" She gave no answer, didn't even look his way. "She don't talk much," Clara explained. "Not since that night." "What night?" Clara's expression hardened. "The night they showed up." Nathan decided not to press her on it. Not right then. He went to the kitchen, put some water on to heat, and brought back 3 cups. Clara drank hers down in big gulps. Lily just held her cup, not taking a sip. Nathan soaked a rag in some warm water and laid it on Jamie's forehead. The little boy stirred and opened his eyes. They were a brilliant blue, and they looked right up at Nathan. "Mama," Jamie whispered. Clara's face just fell apart. She had to turn away. "No, son," Nathan said in a low voice. "It's not your mama, but you're safe now." Jamie's eyes fluttered shut again. Nathan sat back on his heels for a moment, then reached for the boot on the floor. He pulled out the letter and carefully unfolded it. The paper was worn thin, creased in 100 places. The writing was messy and slanted, put down in a hurry. He began to read it. "Nathan, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I don't have the time to explain it all, but you need to know these children are mine. Clara, Lily, and Jamie. Their mother passed on 2 winters ago, and I've been raising them by myself. I got myself in debt to a man named Garrett Wade. I borrowed money to pay for Sarah's medicine, but it wasn't enough. She passed on anyway. Now Wade says I owe more than I borrowed. He wants the land, the house, and all of it. He's coming for me. And after he's done with me, he'll come for them. I know I have no right to ask this of you. It's been 15 years since we last spoke, and you don't owe me a thing, but I'm asking all the same. Keep them safe, please. You are the only man I can trust. William Dawson." Nathan read it a second time and then a third. His hands were shaking again. William Dawson. The name hit him like a punch square in the gut. He hadn't heard that name in 15 years. He hadn't allowed himself to even think it. Will Dawson had been a scout for the cavalry back in the war. They had ridden through hell and back together, night raids, ambushes, running supplies through enemy territory. Those were the days when you put your life in the hands of the man next to you because you had no other choice. And Will had saved Nathan's life. It was outside a little settlement called Cutter's Ridge, a night ambush that went all wrong. Gunfire was coming from everywhere. Nathan caught a piece of shrapnel in the shoulder and went down hard. Will came back for him. He dragged him 300 yards through muck and blood, while bullets whistled past their ears. Will caught a bullet in the leg himself, a bad one that shattered his knee and left him with a limp for the rest of his days. They were shipped out on different wagons. Will was given a discharge, sent home with a medal and not much else. Nathan healed up, finished out his service, and headed west. He never sent a letter, never paid a visit, never once tried to look up the man who had saved his skin. And now Will was dead, and his 3 children were shivering on Nathan's floor. Nathan folded the letter and looked up at Clara. She was watching his every move, just waiting. "Your papa," Nathan said, choosing his words with care. "He didn't make it back." She slowly shook her head. Her eyes were dry, but her little chin was quivering. "They came in the middle of the night," Clara said. 3 men on horseback. Papa heard them coming. He woke me up and told me to take Lily and Jamie down to the root cellar. He said, 'Don't you come out no matter what you hear.' And you listened?" "Yes, sir." I held my hand over Jamie's mouth so he wouldn't make a sound. Lily just covered her ears. Clara's voice was flat, like she was talking about somebody else entirely. "I heard a lot of yelling, Papa's voice, and then gunshots, 2 of them. After that, everything went quiet." "How long did you wait in there?" "Until the sun came up. When I finally came out, the house was on fire. Papa's horse was gone. I found—" She stopped and had to swallow hard. "I found his boot down by the creek. Just the one. The letter was tucked inside." "Just the boot?" "Yes, sir. I looked all over, but all I found was snow and blood." Her voice finally broke. She covered her mouth with her hand and turned her face away. Nathan let her have a moment. Then he asked, "Do you know who those men were? The ones who came?" Clara nodded. "I heard Papa say a name. Wade. Garrett Wade." Nathan felt the air in the room get colder. Garrett Wade. If she was right about that name, this wasn't just about some debt. This was about land and power and a man who acted like he owned the whole world. Nathan had heard plenty of stories about Wade. Everybody in the Wyoming Territory had. He was the man who ran the mining operations up on the northern range with railroad money from back east supporting him. He'd loan money to homesteaders who were down on their luck, and then he would squeeze them dry with interest they could never hope to pay. When they couldn't pay, he took their land. And if they tried to fight back, he sent his men. The kind of men who didn't bother with questions. The kind of men who made sure nobody was left to tell the tale. "Clara," Nathan said, "these men of Wade's, did they see you? Did they have any idea about you and your brother and sister?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. Papa never took us into town. He kept us hidden. Said it was safer. Your papa was a smart man. My papa's gone now." The words just hung there in the quiet room. Nathan didn't have a thing to say to that. He glanced over at Jamie, who was still asleep by the fire, his breathing just a little bit smoother. He saw Lily, sitting still as a stone, her eyes fixed on something nobody else could see. And he looked at Clara, all of 10 years old, standing in a stranger's house, holding herself together with nothing but pure grit. "Y'all will stay here," Nathan said, his voice low. "All of you, for as long as you need." Clara's little shoulders slumped. It wasn't quite relief, more like a heavy burden had shifted just enough for her to catch her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't be thanking me yet." He got to his feet and walked over to the window. Outside, the snow was coming down harder now. The wind was kicking up, piling drifts high against the fence posts. The whole world was just white and empty and cold. But he knew, somewhere out in all that emptiness, Garrett Wade's men were hunting for something. And it wouldn't be long before they heard tell of 3 children who walked straight through a blizzard to find a rancher by the name of Nathan Cole. Nathan turned back to the girl. One more thing. Your papa. Did he ever let on what Wade was really after? The land, the house? Was it something else entirely? Clara hesitated for a moment. Papa said, he said there was something under the ground. Something Wade wanted, something fierce. He said, that's why he wouldn't ever let the debt go. It was never about the money. A muscle in Nathan's jaw clenched tight. Well, that changed the whole picture. If Wade wanted the land for what was buried beneath it, maybe mineral rights or a path for the railroad, then this business was far from over. Wade would keep pushing, and he wouldn't give a damn who got in his way. Did your papa have any papers, deeds, contracts, anything like that? He had a little tin box. He kept it buried out behind the barn. Was it still there when you all left? I don't rightly know. The barn was on fire, too. Nathan squeezed his eyes shut and took a long, slow breath. When he opened them, Clara was still looking at him, her gaze steady and patient, like a girl who'd learned a long time ago that getting panicked never fixed a thing. We're going to figure this whole mess out, Nathan said. But first things first. We need to get your brother well, and we need to keep all of you tucked away out of sight. You think you can do that? Stay inside, stay quiet. We've been doing that our whole lives, Clara said plainly. Nathan just nodded. Something in his chest felt like it cracked a little when she said it like that, as if hiding was just normal, as if being invisible was the only way you could survive. That night, Nathan made a place for Clara and Lily in the back room with a stack of blankets near a small stove. He kept Jamie by the main fire where he could check on him every hour. The boy's fever was burning hot, but it wasn't climbing. Nathan made some broth, carefully spooned it past Jamie's lips, and wiped his forehead with cool, damp cloths. Sometime around midnight, Clara appeared in the doorway. Can't get to sleep? Nathan asked her. No, sir. It's Nathan, or Nate is fine. You don't need to be calling me sir. She sat down on the floor across from him, pulling her knees up to her chest. Is Jamie going to be all right? He's a tough one. That fever's got to break, but he's putting up a fight. He's always been the fighter in the family. Even when Mama was sick, Jamie would climb into her bed and just hold her hand like he thought he could somehow make her get better all by himself. Nathan's throat felt tight. How did your Mama pass on? The consumption took her real slow. Papa sold off nearly everything we had to buy her medicine. That's when he had to borrow from Mr. Wade. Clara paused. The medicine never worked. Mama passed on in February. It was snowing then, too. I'm real sorry to hear that. Papa always said sorry don't bring folks back. She looked right at him. But he also said that kindness is what keeps you going. That's why he trusted you. He told me you were a kind man, even when you tried not to be. Nathan didn't have a clue what to say to that. He'd spent 15 years telling himself he wasn't kind at all, that he was just a man living alone on his ranch, minding his own affairs and keeping his head down. But Will Dawson had seen something different. And now, Will's children were sleeping in his house because of it. Your papa, Nathan said, his voice a bit rough. He was the bravest man I ever had the honor of knowing. Clara's eyes started to shine with tears. He used to say the same thing about you. Jaime let out a cough in his sleep. Nathan reached over and adjusted the blanket around the boy's shoulders. Nathan. Yeah. Those men. Mr. Wade's men. Are they going to find us here? Nathan looked at her. This little girl who'd trekked through a blizzard, who'd carried her sick brother, who'd kept her sister alive, who'd found him across 100 miles of frozen country. Not so long as I'm drawing breath, he said. Clara gave a slow nod. Papa said you'd say that. Your papa knew me pretty well, it seems. He said you'd try to do it all by yourself, too. He said that's your biggest problem. Nathan almost let a smile show. Almost. Go on and get some sleep, Clara. Yes, sir. Nathan. She slipped back into the other room. Nathan sat there by the fire, Will's letter still in his hand. Jamie's soft breathing filled the quiet. Outside, the wind howled and the snow just kept falling, blanketing the world in white, hiding everything. The tracks, the blood, the 3 children who'd come to him with nothing more than a dead man's boot and a letter full of a trust he wasn't at all sure he deserved. But the letter was in his hand, and the children were in his house. And somewhere out there in that frozen darkness, Garrett Wade was still alive and breathing. Nathan picked up the single boot, turning it over in his hands. The leather was all cracked and worn, the sole split clean open on the inside. There were faint stains, likely Will's blood. He set it down gently and pulled out a fresh piece of paper. He needed help. He couldn't do this by himself, no matter what his stubborn pride was telling him. He thought back to the war, about the men he'd served with. Most were gone or scattered to the winds, but there were a few still around, close enough that a letter might reach them. He started writing. 3 letters to 3 names, men he'd once trusted with his very life. If they came, well, maybe they stood a chance. If they didn't... Nathan didn't let himself finish that thought. He folded the letters, tucked them deep inside his coat, and looked at Jamie sleeping by the hearth. Then his eyes went to the boot on the table and the letter beside it, and the fallen snow beyond the window pane. "I won't let you down, Will," Nathan whispered to the empty room. "Not this time." The fire crackled. Jamie kept breathing, and the snow kept on falling, quiet and steady, burying the whole world and everything in it. Jamie's fever finally broke just before the sun came up. Nathan had been sitting right beside him all night long, changing the cloths on his forehead, spooning broth between his dry lips, listening to every single breath, as if it might just be the last one. When the boy's skin at last felt cool to the touch and his breathing evened out, Nathan leaned his head back against the wall and closed his weary eyes. His hands were shaking a bit, but he wouldn't let himself rest, not just yet. Clara was up and about before the first light. She appeared in the doorway of the back room, with Lily following right behind her like a little shadow. And she looked straight at Jamie. "His fever's broke," Nathan told her. Clara's whole body seemed to go limp with relief. She knelt down beside her brother and laid her own hand on his forehead, feeling for herself. Then she looked up at Nathan, and for the first time since she'd shown up on his doorstep, her eyes were soft. "Thank you." "Don't you thank me. He's the one that did all the fighting." Jaime began to stir, and then he opened his eyes. They were clearer now, still a little glassy, but he was present. He looked around the room, a little lost, and then he saw Clara. "Clara? I'm right here, Jaime. We're all right. Where are we?" "Someplace safe." Jaime's gaze shifted over to Nathan. He just stared for a long moment, studying him the way only a child can, direct and without a bit of fear, searching for something he didn't have the words for. "Are you the man from Papa's letter?" Jaime asked, his voice small. Nathan felt his chest get tight. "I am." "Papa said you were brave. Your papa was the brave one." Jaime seemed to think on that for a second. Then he said, "I'm hungry." Clara almost laughed. The sound came out all broken, half a sob and half relief. But it was the closest thing to joy Nathan had heard in that house in 5 long years. He pushed himself to his feet. "I'll fix something up." He made a pot of porridge, plain and thick, with a little bit of sugar he'd been saving. The 4 of them sat at the table together, Nathan at one end, Clara at the other, with Lily and Jamie in between. Jamie ate slow, his small hands gripping the spoon like it was a heavy weight. Lily just picked at her food, but she ate some. She still hadn't said a word, but her eyes were moving now, tracking different things around the room. The rifle hanging above the mantel, the heavy coat by the door, the single boot still sitting on the table. Nathan saw her staring at that boot. He picked it up and set it on a high shelf behind him, getting it out of her sight. Lily's eyes followed it, then went right back to her porridge. She saw something, Clara said in a low voice after breakfast, while Lily and Jamie were sitting by the fire. Clara had started helping Nathan with the dishes, just doing it without even being asked. That night, when Papa told us to get down to the cellar, Lily looked back. I think she saw them, the men. Did she witness what happened? I surely don't know. But a silence fell over her after that day. That little girl used to chatter on and on. She even sang the songs our mama taught us. Clara's hands stopped moving in the wash basin. Now, all she does is clutch that doll and draw. She uses charcoal to draw on any surface she can find, and she draws the very same picture time and again. What is it? Fire. A muscle tightened in Nathan's jaw. He glanced through the doorway at Lily, who sat as still as a statue, her rag doll held tight to her chest. Only 6 years old and already burdened with something no grown man ought to bear. She will speak again, Nathan said quietly. When she feels ready. How can you be so sure? I just don't believe it. Clara stared at him for a long moment before giving a small nod. She turned back to her washing. Nathan wiped his hands and put on his heavy coat. I have to make a trip into town, he announced. I have some letters that need sending and we need some supplies. You two will be fine right here. A worried look crossed Clara's face. You are leaving us? It will only be for a few hours. I will be back well before nightfall, but what if somebody comes? Nathan hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. 10 years old, and she was carrying the weight of 2 younger siblings and a father taken from them. She lived in a world that had already shown her it was not a safe place. No one knows y'all are here. Make sure the doors are locked. Keep away from the windows and do not open the door for anyone but me. What if the person who comes back is not you? Her question struck him with force because it was clever. It showed she had already considered that awful possibility. Then you take Lily and Jamie out the back door. You run east until you hit the creek. Follow it downstream to the south until you see a church with a crooked steeple. You ask for Reverend Whitfield. You tell him Nathan sent you. What if we do not have time to run? There is always time to run, as long as you move fast. Clara did not seem convinced, but she nodded her head anyway. Nathan took his hat and his rifle, saddled up his horse, and rode out into the biting cold. The ride to Elkhorn Creek was 40 minutes across open country. The snow was deep in spots, forcing his horse to a slow walk. Nathan kept his gaze moving, searching the ridgeline, studying the line of trees, and looking for any tracks in the snow that were not made by deer or elk. He did not see any, but that did not mean no one was out there. The town was quiet when he finally rode in. Just a small group of buildings lined up on one street. There was the general store, the saloon, the telegraph office, and at the very end of town, the church with its steeple leaning just a bit to the left. Snow was shoveled up against the fronts of the buildings, and smoke curled up from the chimneys in thin gray trails. Nathan made his way to the telegraph office first. He sent off the 3 letters, one to Frank Mallister in Montana, one to Elijah Tate in Colorado, and one to Robert Harland in Nebraska. He paid an extra fee to ensure they would be sent out immediately. Afterward, he walked down the street toward the general store. A little bell on the door chimed as he pushed it open. The warmth that greeted him inside felt like a solid thing. The store had a smell of coffee, dried herbs, and kerosene. A woman stood behind the counter, arranging canned goods on a shelf. She looked over when she heard the bell. Margaret Hull. Down in Elkhorn Creek, everybody just called her Maggie. She was 38, a widow who had taken on the store after her husband was killed in a mine collapse 3 years back. She managed it by herself, keeping it open through harsh winters that would close down half the territory, and she never once had to ask a soul for help. Nathan Cole, Maggie said with a note of surprise, I have not seen you in a month of Sundays. I was starting to think you had frozen solid out on your claim. Not just yet. What can I get for you? I need flour, beans, coffee, and some salted pork if you have any. He paused for a second. And I need some cloth. Enough to make clothes for children. 3 sets. Maggie raised an eyebrow. She put down the can she was holding and gave him a good, long look. Clothes for children? That is what I said. Well, I will be. Nathan Cole is buying fabric for children's clothes. Yes, I am. She looked him over for another long moment. Maggie Hole had sharp eyes, the kind that saw things most folks would miss. She could tell when a man's hands were calm, but his jaw was clenched tight. She paid attention when a man came in asking for things he had never needed before. How many children are there? She asked. There are 3 of them. They are aged 10, 6, and 4. Are they boys or girls? 2 girls and 1 boy. The boy has been sick. His fever finally broke this morning, but he is still very weak. Maggie walked out from behind her counter. She folded her arms and sized him up, the same way she did with everyone. It was a direct, no-nonsense kind of look. Whose children are they, Nathan? He did not respond right away. He was not sure how much he ought to tell her. But Maggie was not the sort of woman you could tell a lie to, and she was not one to spread gossip either. They belonged to a friend from the war. He passed away. The children made their way to me. Maggie's expression softened just a little. You mean at the Dawson place, the homestead that burned down? Nathan's gaze grew sharp. How did you know about that? A freighter passed through here 2 days ago. He mentioned a homestead north of here that was burned right to the ground. He said the family's name was Dawson. She paused for a moment. He also mentioned that some of Garrett Wade's men were spotted in that area. Nathan remained silent. Maggie moved a step closer. She lowered her voice. Nathan, if Wade has a hand in this, you have got to be careful. He has half this territory tucked away in his pocket. He's been buying up mining claims all along the northern range. Anyone who refuses to sell gets pressured until they have nothing left. I am well aware of what Wade does. Then you also know that he never quits. I know that as well. Maggie held his gaze for a long time. Then she turned and walked to the back of the store, returning with a large bundle. Is that the cloth? Yes. But I also included some wool blankets, a jar of honey, and a small bottle of willow bark tonic for the fever. For the little boy, she said, placing the tonic on the counter. Give him willow bark in some warm water 2 times a day. It will help him. How much do I owe you for everything? Do not you dare insult me. Nathan shook his head. Maggie, I cannot accept this. You can and you will. Those children did not trek through a blizzard just so you could stand here and argue with me over a few dollars. She slid the bundle toward him across the counter. You take it. And if that boy takes a turn for the worse, you bring him straight to me. I know a thing or two about caring for sick children. Nathan looked at her. He saw something in her face that he had never seen before. It was a resolve that was more than just being stubborn. It was something much deeper. Like a woman who had decided a long time ago that the world might be a cruel place, but she did not have to be a part of its cruelty. Thank you, Maggie. Do not waste your breath thanking me. Just focus on keeping those children alive. He took the supplies and began loading them onto his horse. As he was securing the last bundle, a voice called out from across the street. Nathan Cole. Nathan turned around. A man was leaning against a post in front of the saloon. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat with a wide-brimmed hat pulled down low. Nathan did not know the man, but he knew his kind. He was hired muscle, the sort of man who wore a gun as if it were a natural part of him. Do I know you? Nathan asked. No, sir, but the man I work for knows you. And just who might that be? The man offered a smile, but it did not show in his eyes. Mr. Garrett Wade sends his regards. He heard you have been keeping to yourself out at that ranch of yours. He figured you might be getting lonely. Thought maybe you had taken in some company. Nathan's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, which was still in its holster on the saddle. I do not know what you are talking about. I reckon you do. The man pushed himself off the post and started walking toward him, taking his time. 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, walked away from a burned-out homestead about 5 days ago. They vanished right into the snow. I have not seen any children. That is mighty funny because you just bought enough cloth for 3 sets of children's clothes. A cold dread washed over Nathan. He had been watched ever since he had stepped into the store, and maybe even before that. The man came to a stop about 10 feet away, close enough to talk, but far enough to draw a weapon. Mr. Wade wants you to know that he is a reasonable man. He is not looking for any trouble. He just wants what is rightfully his. Those children do not owe him a single thing. Their father did. And debts get passed down from one generation to the next. That is the law of the land. That is not the law. That is called thievery. The man just shrugged. You can call it whatever you like. Mr. Wade has a contract signed and witnessed. William Dawson put up everything he owned as collateral. That includes his land, his property, and his family. His family is not considered property in this territory. With the right judge, they are. Nathan glared at him. He no longer felt the cold. A fire was burning inside him. You go and tell Wade something for me, Nathan said. His voice was quiet, steady, and full of danger. Those children are under my protection now, and anyone who comes looking for them will live to regret it. The man cocked his head to the side. Is that meant to be a threat, Mr. Cole? It is a promise. For a second, neither man moved. The wind whipped snow across the street that separated them. From inside the saloon, a man's laugh rang out, a distant and hollow noise. Then the man smiled that cold smile again. I will be sure to pass along your message. He tipped his hat. You have a good day, Mr. Cole. He turned around and walked back toward the saloon. Nathan stood there and watched him go, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands still hovering near his rifle. He did not move a muscle until the man had disappeared through the saloon doors. Nathan. He turned to see Maggie standing in the doorway of her store, her arms crossed. She had witnessed the entire exchange. That was one of Wade's men, she said. His name is Polk. He has been hanging around town for a week, asking questions. About me. About everyone, really. But now he is asking about you. Nathan untied his horse's reins and swung himself up into the saddle. I've got to get back. Nathan, you wait. Maggie came off the porch and walked right up to his horse. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that was not just worry. It was determination. You cannot handle this all by yourself. I have been on my own for a long time now. And just look at where that has gotten you. She placed a hand on his horse's neck. I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you those children need more than just a man with a rifle. They need medicine, good food, and clothes that actually fit them. They need someone who knows how to properly care for them. I am taking care of it. You are surviving. That is not the same thing. Her words hit him hard because he knew they were true. Nathan had been just surviving for 5 years, feeding himself and keeping the ranch from falling apart. Falling to pieces, just walking through the days of a life that hadn't meant a thing since the day Ellen passed on. I'll ride out tomorrow, Maggie said. Bring some supplies for the children, and I'll check on the boy. Maggie, if Wade has folks watching, just let him watch. Nathan, I've kept this store running through 3 hard winters, 2 droughts and a plague of locusts. Garrett Wade don't scare me one bit. Nathan looked at her, this woman standing there in the snow. Her chin held high and her eyes sharp, just plain refusing to be afraid. All right then, he said. Tomorrow. She gave a firm nod. You be careful riding home. He rode hard, pushing his horse through the deep snowdrifts, his eyes scanning every ridge, every line of trees. The snow was coming down again, lighter this time, but steady. By the time he got back to the ranch, the sun was getting low and the whole world was painted in shades of gray and white. He saw the smoke from his chimney first and then a warm light shining in the window. For just a second, something inside him loosened up, a tight knot he hadn't even known he was carrying. He swung down from the horse, unloaded the supplies, and pushed his way through the door. Clara was at the table, sewing a piece of cloth into something that looked like it might become a shirt. Lily was by the fire, drawing on a scrap of brown paper with a little piece of charcoal. And Jamie was sitting up, all wrapped in a blanket with some color back in his cheeks. You came back, Clara declared. I told you I would be. He placed the supplies on the table. Clara's eyes darted to the cloth, the food, and the willow bark tonic. "Somebody helped you," she stated. "This is way too much for one general store." "A lady named Maggie. She's the one who runs the store in town. She's planning to come out tomorrow to check on Jamie." Clara's expression hardened. "Is that a good idea? Someone else knowing our location?" "She is a good person. Papa put his faith in people too." Those words felt like a slap. Nathan put down the last of the bundles and looked straight at her. "Clara, I understand you have no reason to trust anyone, but I cannot handle this all by myself. Your father understood that. It is why he sent you to me instead of out into the wild." Clara remained silent for a bit. Then she asked, "What took place in town?" Nathan paused. He did not want to share the news. He did not want to place more worry on the shoulders of a 10-year-old girl. But Clara was not like other 10-year-olds. She had earned the right to know the truth by walking through hell to get here. "Wade knows you are still alive," Nathan said. "He does not know your exact whereabouts. But he knows I purchased supplies. He will put the pieces together." Clara's face lost all its color. "How much time do we have?" "I am not sure. A few days, perhaps, maybe even less. What are we supposed to do? I have sent out letters to some men I served with in the war, good men. If they show up, we might stand a chance, and if they do not arrive," Nathan sat down on the other side of the table from her, "then I will come up with another plan. But Clara, I need you to listen to me closely. Nobody is going to take you, Lily, or Jaime. Not Wade, not his crew, not anybody. Do you understand what I am saying?" Clara stared at him for a long while. Then she gave a nod. From near the fireplace, a small voice whispered, "Nathan." Both of them spun around. Lily was sitting completely still, holding the charred stick in her hand, and looking right at him. It was the first word she had uttered since she had come here. Nathan felt his heart skip a beat. "Yes, Lily." She raised her drawing. This time it was not of a fire. It was 4 people standing in front of a house. 3 were small, 1 was tall, and above them she had drawn something that could have been a star, or maybe the sun pushing its way through the clouds. Nathan gently took the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. He looked at the quiet little girl who had carried the noise of gunshots in her mind for days, who had trekked through a blizzard clutching a rag doll in her sister's hand, who had not said a single word until this very moment. "That is really nice, Lily," Nathan managed to say. His voice sounded raspy. "Really nice." Lily looked at him, and then very slowly, very carefully, like a bird contemplating whether it should land, she smiled. Jaime let out a cough from under his blanket. Clara began to unpack the provisions, and Nathan just sat at the table, holding a child's drawing, feeling a part of him stir that he thought had died and been buried a long, long time ago. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The wind howled against the cabin walls, and somewhere out there in the freezing cold, Garrett Wade's men were getting closer. But inside this little house, for the first time in 5 long years, there was a kind of warmth that had absolutely nothing to do with the fire. Maggie showed up the next morning before Nathan had even finished feeding the horses. He heard the wagon before he saw it, the groan of wooden wheels on fresh snow, the steady rhythm of horse hooves. He walked around the side of the barn, holding his rifle, and came to a halt when he saw her. She was wrapped up in a thick wool coat, her hair pinned up tight beneath a dark bonnet, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. The wagon was full of blankets, a crate of food, what appeared to be a small medicine box, and a pile of children's clothes she must have stayed up all night sewing. "You said you would come tomorrow," Nathan pointed out. "The sun is barely up." "I said tomorrow. I did not specify the time." Maggie climbed down from the wagon and looked at him. "Are you going to help me with this stuff or just stand there clutching that rifle?" Nathan leaned the rifle against the porch railing and began to haul the supplies inside. Clara met them right at the door, her eyes filled with caution, her body blocking the entrance to the room where Lily and Jamie were. "Clara," Nathan said, "this is Maggie Hull, the woman I was telling you about." Maggie did not rush toward her. She did not try to give the girl a hug or make a big fuss over her. She simply stood there on the threshold and said, "Good morning, Clara. I have brought some things for your brother. Would it be all right if I had a look at him?" Clara observed her for a long moment, sizing her up, making a decision. Then she moved out of the way. Maggie went straight to Jamie. She got down on her knees beside him, placed the back of her hand on his forehead, inspected his eyes, and listened to the sound of his breathing. Jaime watched her with big, curious eyes. "You are Maggie?" he asked. "That is me. Nathan said you are a kind person." Maggie shot a quick look at Nathan. A subtle expression passed over her face. Maybe it was amusement, or maybe warmth. Oh, did he now? Nathan turned his head away, suddenly finding the contents of the crate very interesting. Maggie gave Jamie the willow bark tonic, mixing it with some honey and warm water. She examined his throat, felt the glands on his neck, and asked him a series of questions. When did the cough begin? Did he have any pain in his chest? Could he take a deep breath without it catching? "He is going to be fine," Maggie announced as she stood up. "His fever has broken, but his lungs are still putting up a fight. Keep him warm, make sure he keeps drinking fluids, and do not let him run around for the next few days." "He does not run," Clara said from her corner. "He has not run since our mama passed away." Maggie looked over at Clara. A silent understanding seemed to pass between them, a connection from one woman to another. Even though one of them was only 10, Maggie recognized loss. You could see it in her posture, in the steadiness of her hands, in the patience she wore like a second skin. "Your mama must have been a very strong woman," Maggie said, "to raise a daughter like you." Clara's chin quivered, but she kept it steady. "She was." Maggie nodded. Then she turned her attention to Lily, who was sitting by the fire with her rag doll, taking in everything with those large, silent eyes. "And who is this little one?" Maggie asked, squatting down. "That is Lily," Clara answered. "She does not really—" "I like your doll," Maggie said in a soft voice. "Does she have a name?" Lily looked at Maggie for a good long while. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she said, "Rose." Clara's jaw dropped. Nathan froze right where he was standing. Lily had not spoken more than a single word since her arrival, and now she had said 2 words in 2 days. Maggie smiled. "Rose is a lovely name. You take very good care of her." Lily nodded and hugged Rose a little tighter to her chest, but she did not break her gaze from Maggie. And there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, a tiny spark as delicate as the flame of a candle. Maggie stayed for most of the morning. She cooked a real meal, a hearty stew with salted pork, potatoes, and carrots she had brought from her own root cellar. The children ate as if they had not had a proper meal in weeks, which Nathan suddenly realized was probably the truth. Clara had 2 full bowls. Jaime ate slowly but managed to finish every last bite. Even Lily cleaned her plate. While the children were resting, Maggie and Nathan stood on the porch speaking in low voices. "That little girl is holding those 2 together with nothing but pure grit," Maggie said. "She has been their mother since they lost their own. Maybe even before that." "I know. She is 10 years old, Nathan. She deserves to be 10. "I know that as well." Maggie looked at him. "And you need some help. Real help, not just more supplies. I told you I sent some letters. Letters to men who know how to use guns. That is not the kind of help I mean." She crossed her arms. "Those children need a steady hand. They need a routine. They need somebody who can be there to wipe their tears and teach them how to laugh again. You are good at protecting folks, Nathan. But tell me, when was the last time you truly took care of someone?" That question hit him hard. He thought about Ellen. Her voice, her hands, the way she made this whole ranch feel like a home instead of just a collection of buildings. Since she passed, he had kept the walls up and the roof from leaking. But he had not been taking care of a thing. He had just been maintaining what was left. "I am learning," he said, his voice low. Maggie's face softened just a bit. "I know you are. And that is exactly why I am going to keep coming out here. It is not safe. Wade has a fella in town named Polk. He is watching. Polk watches everybody. I have been watched by a whole lot worse. Maggie? Nathan? She said his name with a firmness that meant the discussion was over. I buried a husband. I ran a general store through a winter that took out half the livestock in the territory. I have been threatened by drunks, cheated by suppliers, and robbed twice. Garrett Wade is nothing but a bully with deep pockets. I have handled bullies before. Nathan just looked at her, standing right there in the cold with her arms crossed and her jaw set. And he felt something he had not felt in a long, long time. The strange and unsettling feeling of not being all alone. All right, he said, but if you see Polk or anyone else following you, you turn right around and head back. I will be the judge of what I do, but I thank you for the concern. She climbed back up on her wagon seat, took hold of the reins, and looked down at him. Nathan. Yeah, those children are watching you. You know that, right? Everything you do, every single word you say. They are learning if the world is a safe place or not, just by seeing how you walk through it. She drove off before he could find the words to answer. Nathan stood there on the porch until the wagon was swallowed up by the white, her words settling in his chest like a heavy stone. Later that afternoon, Frank Mallister showed up. Nathan heard the horse and had his rifle in his hands before he even saw who was riding in. But the man who came through the snow was one of a kind. Tall, lean, weathered like old saddle leather with a gray beard and eyes that had seen every bad thing the West had to offer. Cole, Mallister said, getting down with the slow, deliberate moves of a man whose body had more miles on it than it ought to. You got my letter. I did. Rode for 2 days straight. Dang near froze my ears clean off. You did not have to come all this way, Frank. Mallister tied up his horse and looked square at Nathan. Will Dawson pulled me out of a burning supply wagon at Chickamauga. You really think I am going to sit back in Montana while his children need help? Nathan let out a long breath. He led Mallister into the house. The children looked up from the floor. Clara was alert, suspicious. Jamie was just curious. Lily hid herself behind her little rag doll. Kids, Nathan said, this here is Frank Mallister. He served with your papa. Mallister took off his hat and just looked at the three of them. His face, which was usually as hard as granite, seemed to crack. His eyes got a little glassy. Lord have mercy, he said softly. You look just like him. All three of you. Clara sat up a little straighter. You knew our papa. I surely did, miss. He was one of the finest men I ever rode with. Did you know our mama, too? I met her one time. Your papa, he talked about her every single day. Said she had hair the color of a sunset and the strongest hands in 3 counties. Clara's eyes started to well up. She blinked hard and had to look away. Mallister cleared his throat and turned back to Nathan. Tell me everything. They sat down at the table while the children got settled over by the fire. Nathan told him the whole story. The letter, the homestead burned to the ground, Wade's contract, the man named Polk in town. Wade's men were already circling like buzzards. Mallister listened without saying a word, his jaw getting tighter with every detail. How many men does Wade have on his payroll? Mallister asked. 12, maybe more. Polk is one. There will be others. And those contract claims, they put up everything, the land, the property, even family as collateral. That cannot be legal. It does not matter if he has got a judge in his pocket who says it is. Mallister rubbed his jaw. 2 more are coming, Elijah Tate and Big Rob Harlan. If they got my letters, Tate is as reliable as the sun. Harlan is a bit of a wild card, but he thought the world of Will. I know. We need a plan, Nathan. 4 men against 12. Those are not great odds. I know that too. So what is the play? Nathan leaned back in his chair. Wade wants this land. Clara said her papa mentioned something was under it. Could be minerals, maybe a railroad easement, whatever it is. Wade burned the house to send a clear message, but he is still looking. He needs the children because that is how he controls the claim. If there is no heir, the land goes back to the territory and he can snatch it up for next to nothing. But if there is an heir, he has to go through them. Mallister nodded his head. So the children are not just in danger, They are leverage. Yeah. Then we need two things. We need to keep them alive, and we need proof that Will's claim is solid as a rock. Any deeds? Any papers? Clara mentioned Will had a little tin box buried out behind the barn. The barn that burned down, yeah. Mallister let out a low whistle. Well, that is a problem. Maybe not. If it was buried deep enough, the fire might not have gotten to it. You thinking about heading up there? I am thinking somebody has to, not you. Wade's men are watching you. I will go. Mallister stood up. I will leave before the sun comes up. Ride hard. If that box is still there, I will find it. Frank, if Wade's men are still poking around that homestead, then I will deal with them. Nathan just looked at him. This old man who had ridden for 2 days through a blizzard without even being asked, who was now offering to ride straight into hostile territory for children he had only just met. Why are you doing all this, Frank? Mallister did not answer him right away. He walked over to the fireplace and looked down at the children. Jamie was fast asleep in Clara's lap. Lily was drawing again, not a fire this time, but a horse. Because I owed your papa a life, Mallister said. He was not speaking to Nathan, but to the children, even though they could not hear him. And because some debts, they do not just go away. He was gone before dawn the next morning, just like he said he would be. Nathan watched him ride north until the snow just swallowed him whole. Then he went back inside and got the fire going. 2 days went by. Elijah Tate arrived on the first day, quiet and lean, carrying a rifle that looked like it was a part of his own arm. He did not say a word when he got off his horse, just looked at Nathan and gave a single nod. Tate. Cole. You came. You asked. That was about the longest conversation Nathan had ever had with Elijah Tate. Nathan led him inside, introduced him to the kids, and pointed him to the guest chair by the window, the one that had the best view of the front yard. Tate sat down, laid his rifle across his knees, and did not move a muscle for 3 whole hours. Big Rob Harlan rode in on the second day, loud and larger than life, his laughter arriving long before his horse did. He blew through the door like a thundering storm, saw the children, and dropped right down to one knee. Well, I will be, he boomed. Will Dawson's babies? Just look at you 3. Jamie stared up at him with wide eyes. You are big. That I am, son, and I am friendly, which is a mighty rare combination. He grinned at Clara. Your papa ever tell you about the time I had to carry him across a river because he was too dadgum stubborn to admit he could not swim? Clara's mouth twitched just a little. No. Well, it is a long story. It involves a mule, a barrel of whiskey, and a very angry sergeant. I will tell you all about it later. Even Clara almost cracked a smile. That night, the 4 men sat around the kitchen table. Mallister had not made it back yet, and Nathan was trying his best not to let that worry him. Here's what we know, Nathan said. Wade has got the numbers. He has got the money. He might even have a judge. What he does not have is the deed to the land. If Mallister finds that tin box, Tate started to say, if he finds it, we have proof that Will Dawson owned that land free and clear. The contract Wade is waving around is built on a complete lie. You cannot use another man's land as collateral for a debt if the land is not part of the deal. And you sure cannot claim a man's children as property. You can if the judge says you can, Harlan grumbled. Then we go over the judge's head to the territorial governor. That is a long shot. It is the only shot we have got. Harlan cracked his big knuckles. Or we could just shoot Wade and be done with it. That makes us murderers. Or it makes us heroes. All depends on who is telling the story. Rob. Fine, the legal way it is. But if Wade comes riding in here with guns drawn, I am not waiting around for a lawyer. Nathan nodded. Fair enough. A sharp knock on the door cut the conversation clean in half. Everyone froze. Nathan grabbed his rifle. Tate was already at the window. One rider, Tate said. A woman. Nathan opened the door. Maggie was standing there, breathing hard, her face flushed from the cold. Maggie, what is it? Wade's in town. He rode in tonight with 8 men. They are all down at the saloon. Nathan's blood ran cold. 8, I counted them myself. And he is not just passing through. He is asking questions about you, about this ranch, about the road out here. She paused. He is coming, Nathan, tomorrow. Maybe even sooner. How do you know? Because Polk came into my store about an hour ago and told me I ought to stay home tomorrow. Said there was going to be some trouble out on the road and he did not want to see me get hurt. Her eyes were blazing with anger. He said it like he was doing me some kind of favor. Nathan looked back at the men at the table. Tate, Harlan. 2 men plus himself. Mallister was still gone. 3 guns against 9. Come on inside, Nathan said. Maggie stepped in and saw the other men. She looked at Tate, then at Harlan. These the men you wrote to? She asked Nathan. 2 of them. The 3rd one is still out there. Well, you had better hope he gets back here soon. Maggie set a heavy sack on the table. I brought ammunition, every last round I had in the store. Harlan broke into a wide grin. I like her. This is not funny, Mr. Harlan. Robert Harlan. And you are right, ma'am. It is not funny at all. His grin vanished. But I have learned that if you cannot have a little laugh before a fight, you sure as heck will not be laughing after one. Maggie looked straight at Nathan. What is the plan? You are going home. I am not, Maggie. Those children are in that room. She pointed toward the back of the house, her voice low but fierce as a wildfire. 3 children who lost their father and their home and every single thing they have ever known. And you honestly think I am going to drive back home and just wait to hear what happens? You do not know me at all, Nathan. Nathan opened his mouth to argue. Don't need... But Clara's voice interrupted from the hallway. Let her stay. Everyone turned their heads. Clara was standing there in her nightgown. Lily was right behind her, holding Rose. Jamie was peeking out from behind Lily. Please, Clara pleaded. Let her stay. Nathan looked at Clara, then at Maggie, and then at the 3 children standing together in the hallway, small and barefoot and scared. And it dawned on him, something he should have grasped from the very start. He could not keep them safe by shutting people out. He could only truly protect them by letting the right people in. All right, Nathan said. You can stay. Maggie nodded. She walked over to the children, knelt, and opened up her arms. Lily went to her first. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a little girl who needed to be held. Maggie wrapped her arms around her and looked up at Clara over Lily's small head. I have got her, Maggie said. You can get some rest now. Clara's strong facade crumbled. Facade. 10 years of being brave, of being the mother, of holding everything and everyone together, and someone had finally told her it was okay to stop. She did not cry, not just yet, but her shoulders sagged and her hands uncurled and she let out a long breath that sounded like it had been held inside her for months. Jamie tugged on Nathan's sleeve. Nathan, yeah, buddy, are the bad men coming? Nathan knelt down, his gaze fixed on the small boy. He saw the boy's clear blue eyes, his curly brown hair, and the same grit his mother had. There are some men coming, Nathan said, his voice low and steady. But they are not going to hurt you. I give you my word on that. The boy asked, How do you know? Nathan laid a gentle hand on Jamie's shoulder. Because your daddy asked me to keep you safe, and a man always keeps his promises. Jamie looked deep into his eyes for a long moment. Then he just said, Okay. He said it with the kind of pure, simple trust that only a 4-year-old boy can have. In that moment, something inside Nathan's chest just broke wide open. He stood up and took a look around the room. Tate was by the window. Harlan sat at the table. Maggie was holding Lily, and Clara stood quietly in the hall with Jamie right there beside him. Everyone should try and get some sleep, Nathan announced. Tomorrow's fixin' to be a mighty long day. No one put up a fight. Maggie led the children into the back room. Tate stayed put, his eyes on the darkness outside. Harlan made a bed on the floor by the door, his pistol resting on his chest. Nathan sat all by himself at the table with the letter right in front of him. He read it just one last time. "You are the only man I trust." He carefully folded it and tucked it into his shirt pocket right over his heart. Then he checked his rifle, made sure every chamber was loaded, and just sat there in the dark, listening. He listened to the wind, to the deep silence, and to the soft sound of children breathing in the other room. Mallister was still out there somewhere. Wade was back in town with 8 of his men. The snow just kept on falling, and Nathan Cole sat in the blackness of his kitchen, a dead man's letter pressed against his chest, and waited for whatever was headed his way. Mallister showed up just as the sun was thinking about rising. Nathan heard the horse before he ever saw it, moving with a slow, tired rhythm through the deep snow. He was already at the door with his rifle before anybody else even stirred. When he saw the old man slumped over in the saddle with blood frozen down his left arm, Nathan took off running. "Frank!" Mallister looked down, his face a pale gray and his lips all cracked. His eyes were heavy with weariness, but he was smiling. "I found it," Mallister said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a tin box. It was dented up and black with soot, but it was all in one piece. Buried 3 feet down, right where the old barn used to stand. Had to dig through frozen ground with my own 2 hands. Nathan took the box and helped Mallister get down from his horse. The old man grunted in pain when his boots hit the snow. "You are bleeding." Ran into 2 of Wade's boys out at the homestead. They were not expecting company. "Did you kill them?" "One of them took off running. The other one will not be getting on a horse for a good long while." Mallister leaned hard on Nathan's shoulder. "They know, Nathan. They saw the box. The one that got away. He's going to tell Wade everything." Nathan helped him get inside. Maggie was already up and had water heating on the stove. She took one look at Mallister and got right to work. She cleaned the wound, a bullet graze high on his arm, and wrapped it up tight with a clean cloth. "You are a lucky man," Maggie said. 2 inches to the right and you would have lost that arm." "Luck did not have a thing to do with it, ma'am. I'm just too darn stubborn to die." "I can see that," Maggie said as she tied off the bandage. "Do not move that arm for at least 2 days." "I cannot promise you that." "I am not asking for a promise. I am giving you an order." Mallister looked over at Nathan. "Who in the world is this woman?" "That is Maggie Holler. She runs the general store in town." "Seems to me like she runs a whole lot more than that." Maggie paid them no mind and went to check on the children. Nathan sat down at the table and opened the tin box. Inside were some papers, a land deed with William Dawson's name on it, a survey map of the land, and a folded-up document from the land office confirming the mineral rights for the property. Nathan just stared at that mineral rights paper. So there it was. The reason Wade had burned down the house, the reason he had killed Will Dawson, the reason he was now coming for 3 little children. "Well, what does it say?" Mallister asked, sitting down like he weighed 1,000 pounds. "Will owned the mineral rights completely. He bought them separate from the land, long before he ever took a loan from Wade. That means the loan contract could not touch him. Wade's claim on the land is not worth the paper it is written on, and Wade knows it. He has known it the whole time. That is why he wants the children. If they are dead and gone, there is no one to inherit. The rights go back to the territory, and Wade can buy them for pennies on the dollar." Mallister let out a long, slow breath. So the contract was never really about a debt. It was a trick to get Will to sign away something he did not even realize was on the table. But Will was smarter than Wade gave him credit for. He kept the mineral rights separate. He buried the proof. And now we have got it. Yeah, now we have got it. Harlan showed up in the doorway then, his big body filling up the whole frame. "That is good news, but good news does not stop bullets. How long you reckon we have got till Wade gets here?" "Hours," Nathan said, "maybe less. His man from the homestead has probably reached town by now." Tate spoke up from the window where he had been sitting guard all night. Got 9 riders coming from the northwest, and they are moving slow. The whole room went quiet. Nathan stood and walked over to the window. Tate moved aside to give him a look. Out in the distance, through the swirling snow, he could see dark figures moving against the white landscape. Riders in a line moving with a slow and steady purpose. 9, Nathan confirmed. That is not all of them. The others might be circling around, Tate added, coming up from the south, or maybe he is just holding some back. Either way, they have got us outnumbered. Nathan turned back to face the room. Mallister was hurt, but he was on his feet, his good hand already resting on his pistol. Harlan was loading his rifle, his face grim, and all the humor gone from his eyes. Tate had not moved an inch from the window, solid as a rock. Frank, you take the roof. Bad arm or not, you can still shoot. You are darn right I can. Tate, you stay at that window. Pick your shots careful. Do not waste a single bullet. Tate gave one short nod. Harlan, you have got the back of the house. If they try to circle around, you stop them. Harlan cracked his neck. They will not get past me. Nathan then looked at Maggie. She was standing in the hallway with the children huddled behind her. Clara's face was as white as a sheet. Lily was clutching Rose with both hands, and little Jamie had a tight grip on Maggie's skirt. Maggie, take the children down to the cellar. I know what to do. If you hear shooting, and then it gets quiet, I take them out through the cellar hatch, head east to the creek, and then south to Reverend Whitfield's. Clara already told me. Nathan looked at Clara. The little girl looked right back at him, her eyes old, with eyes that were steady and burning. Nathan, Clara whispered, please do not die. His throat tightened up. He knelt, getting right down on her level. I am not planning on it, sweetheart. Papa was not planning on it either. Her words struck him harder than any bullet because she was right. Will Dawson had no plans to die. He had plans to survive, to raise his children, to clear his debts, and to live out his days, and all those plans were not enough. Nathan gently took Clara's hand in his. Your papa did not have what I have. What is that? Friends with rifles and a righteous cause to fight for. A little smile almost touched Clara's lips. Almost. Then she took Lily's hand, lifted Jamie into her arms, and followed Maggie down the stairs into the cellar. Nathan watched them disappear, and something inside him turned to iron. It was not anger, not fear, but something older, something deeper. It was a resolve that settled clear down into his bones. He turned back to face the room. Let us go. Nathan walked out onto the porch just as the riders came into the yard. The snow had let up some, and the morning light was pale and gray. The riders fanned out, making a wide half-circle. There were 9 men, all of them armed. Garrett Wade sat in the middle of them on a big black horse. He had on a long, dark coat. His hat was pulled down low, and his face was perfectly calm. It was the face of a man who had done this sort of thing before, and figured he would do it again. Wade swung down from his horse, slow and deliberate. He stood there in the snow, staring at Nathan with pale eyes that had no warmth and no hurry in them. Nathan Cole, Wade said, his voice as smooth and measured as a man reading the fine print on a contract. I was hoping we could handle this without any trouble. You brought 9 armed men to my front door. That does not look like settling to me. Insurance, Wade said with a thin smile. Surely you can understand that. I understand you killed a man and torched his home, and now you have come for his children. That is a mighty dramatic way of looking at it. It is the plain truth. Wade cocked his head to one side. Truth is a bendable thing out here, Mr. Cole. What really matters is what is written down on paper, and who has the power to make it stick. I have a contract, signed and sealed. Your contract is not worth the paper it is printed on, and you know it. For a second, something flashed in Wade's eyes. It was the first little crack. I beg your pardon. William Dawson's mineral rights were bought separate from the deed to the land. They are not part of your loan agreement. They never were. You built this whole scheme of yours on a lie, Wade, and I have the paperwork right here to prove it." Wade's jaw clenched. The men sitting on their horses behind him stirred. "You are bluffing," Wade said. "Go on and try me." Those papers were in a tin box behind the Dawson barn, a barn that is not there anymore. The box was buried 3 feet in the ground. Fire does not burn that deep. Nathan held up the old tin box. "Your boys should have dug a little deeper." Wade just stared at the box. For the very first time, that calm look on his face broke. His hands balled into fists at his sides. The polite mask slipped away, and what was underneath was ugly. It was fury, and calculation, and desperation all rolled into one. "That does not change a thing," Wade said. But his voice was different now. It was harder, not nearly as smooth. "A piece of paper does not mean much if there is nobody left alive to show it to a judge. Is that supposed to be a threat? It is a fact of life." Nathan placed the box on the porch rail. "I have already sent copies to the territorial governor. Sent them by telegraph yesterday. Every last word, a description of the deed, the mineral rights, your faked-up contract, and a full report of what you did to William Dawson. By the time you get back to town, the governor's office will know everything." Wade's face went pale. Nathan just watched him. He watched the exact moment the man understood his whole plan had a hole in it, and that hole was getting bigger by the second. It was all a bluff. Nathan had not sent a thing to the governor. There had not been enough time. But Wade did not know that, and the fear plain on his face said he believed every word. "You are lying," Wade said, but the confidence was all gone from his voice. "Are you willing to bet your whole future on that?" Wade looked over at his men. They looked right back at him, just waiting for the order. But you could feel that something had changed. They had signed on to scare a lone rancher, not to get into a legal fight with the whole territorial government. "Now here is what is going to happen," Nathan said. "You are all going to get on your horses and ride out of here. You are going to pull back every last claim you have on the Dawson property, and you are going to leave these children alone. And if I do not, then the governor gets a letter with your name all over it, spelling out murder, arson, fraud, and trying to force 3 orphan children into servitude. And I do not reckon even your pet judge can make all of that just disappear." Wade stood there, breathing heavy. The snow kept falling between them, quiet and soft. The silence just hung in the air. Then one of Wade's men, the one they called Polk, finally spoke up. "Mr. Wade, maybe we ought to stand down." "Sir, if the governor—" "I said shut up!" Wade took a step toward Nathan. His hand started to drift toward his coat. Nathan's own grip got tighter on his rifle. "I would not do that if I were you," Nathan said, his voice low. "You think you have won?" Wade's voice was quiet, and it was shaking with pure rage. "You think a piece of paper and a bluff changes a single thing? I own this territory. I own the law. I own the very ground under your feet. You do not own those children, and you sure as heck do not own me." Wade went for his gun. The shot came from the roof. Mallister's rifle cracked, splitting the cold air, and the bullet kicked up snow and frozen dirt right at Wade's feet. Wade stumbled backward. His men started reaching for their own weapons. "The next one goes through your chest," Mallister called down from up high. "And I do not ever miss twice." Tate showed up in the window, his rifle aimed right at the closest rider. Harlan stepped out from around the side of the house, his shotgun leveled at the whole bunch. "You are surrounded, Wade," Nathan said. "You have got 4 guns pointed at you and no place to run. Your men can see that plain as day, even if you cannot." Wade looked all around, his face twisted up with fury. He looked at his men. They looked back at him, and one by one Nathan saw it happen. The decision, made quiet and quick, passed from one man to the next. They were not about to die for this. Polk was the first to give in. He lifted his hands a little, palms facing out. "I ain't dying over some contract disagreement." Another rider turned his horse, then another one, then 3 more after that. They peeled off like dead leaves in the wind, just riding back the way they came. They were not fast, not panicked. They were just done, Wade watched them go, his face just crumpled. Not with fear, but with something uglier. It was the understanding that power, once it starts to crack, cannot be put back together again. 3 men were left. Wade and 2 riders who were either too loyal for their own good or too dumb to leave. "It is over, Wade," Nathan said. "Go on home." Wade's eyes were burning. He looked at Nathan with a pure, unclouded hatred, the kind that does not go away, the kind that settles deep in a man's bones. "This is not over." "Yeah, it is. You cannot protect them forever. You are just one man. I am not just one man. I never was." Wade just stared at him. Then something in his face finally broke. It was not exactly defeat. It was more like he finally realized he had made a terrible miscalculation. Not about the guns or the papers, but about the one thing he had never thought to consider. The one thing that could not be bought or burned or taken away. He climbed back on his horse. The 2 riders that were left fell in behind him. He looked down at Nathan. "One last time. You will regret this. I have regretted plenty of things in my life. This will not be one of them." Wade yanked his horse around and rode away. The 3 of them made a dark line cutting through the white snow. Nathan watched them leave. He did not lower his rifle until they were clean over the ridge and completely out of sight. The silence that came after they left was huge. Mallister climbed down off the roof, wincing as he held his bad arm against his side. Tate stepped out onto the porch, his face as calm as if the whole business had been no more exciting than watching the clouds roll by. Harlan came around to the front, slinging the shotgun over his shoulder with a grin. "Well now," Harlan said, "that was something else." Nathan leaned his rifle against the wall. His hands were shaking now. They had been steady during, but not after. "Somebody open the cellar." He went to the cellar door and pulled it wide. "It is all over. You all can come on up." Maggie came up the steps first, her face still tight with worry. Then came Clara, carrying Jamie. Then Lily, who was clutching Rose, her eyes big and wide. "Is he gone?" Clara asked. "He is gone. Is he coming back?" Nathan looked down at her. He wanted to tell her no. He wanted to give her that solid guarantee, that clean, simple answer a child of 10 deserved. But Clara had earned the honest truth. "I do not think so," Nathan said. "We have got the deed. We have got the mineral rights. His contract is no good, and his men just up and walked out on him. But you do not know for sure." "No, but I do know this. If he ever comes back, we will be ready, and he will find the same thing he found today, folks who do not back down." Clara sized him up for a good long while, and then she gave a slow nod. "All right." Jamie started to wiggle in her arms. "Can I get down now?" Clara set him on his feet. The boy walked right up to Nathan, looked up at that tall frame, and asked, "Did you keep your word?" Nathan knelt down to his level. "I surely did, little man." "Good." Jamie stuck out his hand, small and warm and open. "Papa always said when a man keeps his promise, you are supposed to shake his hand." A sting came to Nathan's eyes. He took Jamie's little hand and shook it, gentle as could be, but firm. "Your papa taught you right," Nathan said, his voice a bit thick. Lily pulled on Maggie's sleeve. Maggie glanced down. Lily was holding up a brand new picture. It showed 4 stick people with guns in front of a house, and behind them stood 3 smaller people. Way up high, she had drawn a line of dark figures on horseback riding away. "Is that us?" Maggie asked. Lily nodded. "You draw mighty fine, sweetheart." Lily just leaned her head against Maggie and shut her eyes. Maggie wrapped an arm around the little girl and held her tight. That evening they all ate supper together, gathered around a table that was not nearly big enough. Harlan ended up on an old crate, and Tate just leaned against the wall with his plate. Maggie did all the cooking, and for the first time nobody said a word about who was in charge of the kitchen. Mallister spun yarns about the war, the cleaner ones, full of grit and good humor and brotherhood. Harlan would chime in with extra details that might have been true or might have been stretched a bit. Even Tate managed something that looked an awful lot like a smile. Clara sat squished between Nathan and Maggie. She stayed quiet mostly, but she ate her fill and she listened. Once or twice, Nathan saw her looking around the room with a softness in her eyes he had never seen before. It was a look of wonder, like she had plumb forgotten what it was like for people to come together around a table just because they chose to. After they had eaten, Nathan went out on the porch. The night air was sharp and quiet. The snow had finally given up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the stars were out, a whole river of them glittering across a black sky. Maggie came out to join him. "You were bluffing him," she said, "about the governor." Nathan did not say anything. "You never sent a telegraph. There was no time." "No, which means he can come back. He could, but he will not." "And how do you know that for sure?" "Because his own men saw him get bested right in front of witnesses. A man like Wade, his power is all built on fear, on people believing he is unbeatable. Now that they have seen him tuck his tail and run, they will not follow him the same. The spell is broken." Maggie stood quiet for a spell. "And if you're wrong? Then first thing tomorrow I will send the real papers to the governor and make this whole thing official. You should probably do that anyway. I will." They stood there in the quiet, just looking up at the stars. Nathan could feel her standing there beside him, her warmth, her solidness. She was not leaning on him, did not have to. She just stood there, steady and sure, the same way she stood through everything else. "Nathan," Maggie said. "Yeah. What is going to happen with the children now?" He had been turning that very question over in his mind all day long, right through the standoff, the fear, and the loud relief of it all. That one question had been sitting patiently in the back of his head, just waiting for the guns to go quiet. "They are staying," Nathan said. "For how long?" "For good." Maggie looked straight at him. "Are you sure about that?" "Will ask me to keep them safe." A promise like that does not come with an end date. Keeping them safe is one thing, raising them is another. "I know. But they need a home. And this is a home. This is a ranch with one bed and a room full of saddles. I will build more rooms. You are going to need help. I know it." Maggie turned to face him squarely. "Nathan Cole, are you trying to ask me something?" He looked at her. This woman who had charged through a blizzard with medicine and bullets, who had held Lily when she needed holding, and who told Clara it was all right to rest. The woman who had taken over his kitchen, fed his whole outfit, and flat out refused to leave when any smart person would have been long gone. "I am not much for asking," Nathan said. "I am better at building things and just hoping folks decide to show up. That is a terrible plan." "Yeah, it is." A small smile touched Maggie's lips. It was not much, just a little lift at the corners, but it lit up her entire face. "I will be here tomorrow," she said, "and the day after that. We will figure out the rest of it as we go." Nathan nodded. Something inside of him, a part that had been frozen solid for 5 years, maybe even longer, began to thaw. "All right," he said, "as we go." Maggie went on back inside. Nathan stayed on the porch a little longer, watching the stars and listening to the sounds drifting out the door. Harlan's big laugh. Clara's voice asking Mallister another question about the war. Jaime's small, bright voice full of questions. And underneath it all, a sound so quiet he almost did not catch it. Lily was humming. It was a soft, slow tune, one of those old songs Clara had told him about, the kind their mama used to sing to them, the kind their papa would sing when he thought they were fast asleep. Nathan closed his eyes and just listened to it. That small, fragile tune floated out on the cold night air, filling up the empty spaces inside the house, between the people, between all the broken pieces that had somehow found a way to fit together here. He rested his hand on his chest, where Will's letter was tucked, and he stood there until the song ended. The silence that came after was the good kind, warm and full and breathing with life. Mallister, Tate, and Harlan left the next week. They waited until Nathan had ridden into Elorn Creek and sent off the real papers to the territorial governor's office. He sent the deed, the mineral rights, a sworn statement about how William Dawson died, and a formal complaint filed against Garrett Wade. The fellow running the telegraph office took one look at that stack of papers and let out a long, low whistle. But he kept his questions to himself. Nathan paid him double to make sure every last word got through clear. When he got back to the ranch, the three men had their things packed and were ready to ride. Mallister shook Nathan's hand with his good arm. The other one was still bandaged up tight, but the healthy color was back in his face. You need anything, you send a letter. Do not wait 15 years this time. I will not. Mallister glanced toward the house where Clara was standing in the doorway holding Hamey on her hip. Take good care of those kids, Nathan. It is what Will would have wanted, more than anything else in this world, I know. Tate did not say a word. He just gave a quick nod, touched the brim of his hat, and swung up onto his horse. For Elijah Tate, that was a whole heartfelt speech, and Nathan understood every bit of it. Harlan was the toughest one to see go. He stood there in the yard, his big frame throwing a long shadow on the snow. He looked at Nathan with eyes that were surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. You know, Harlan said, when I got your letter, I almost did not come. I thought about it for a good 10 seconds. Then I remembered Will hauling me out of a ditch at Cedar Creek after everyone else had scattered. He did not even know my name back then, just grabbed my collar and started dragging. Harlan paused for a moment. Some folks just come into your life and change the whole shape of it. Will was one of those for me. And now you are one of those for these kids. Nathan did not trust himself to speak, so he just wrung Harlan's hand hard. You ever need a fellow who can lift a horse? Harlan said with a grin. You know where I am at. Can you actually lift a horse? Almost did one time. The horse had other ideas. Harlan let out a big laugh that seemed to shake the whole yard and got on his horse. He tipped his hat toward the house. Bye, Clara. Bye, Jamie. Bye, Miss Lily. From the doorway, Jamie waved back with his whole body. Bye, Big Rob. Harlan rode away, still laughing. And just like that, Nathan was alone again, watching those three men disappear over the ridge. They were good men, the kind who show up when a dead friend's children are in need, and they left knowing the job was done. After they rode off, a new kind of quiet settled over the ranch. It wasn't that on-edge quiet from the days before. This was softer, like the whole world was taking a deep breath after a bad storm. Nathan got to building. He hadn't planned on it, but one morning he woke up, took one look at that back room where three kids were sleeping on blankets between old dusty saddles, and he just picked up a hammer. He started by ripping out the old storage shelves. Then he framed up a new wall, making two little spaces, one for Clara and one for Lily and Hamey to share. It wasn't much, but it was a place of their own. Clara stood by and watched him the whole time. She'd hand him nails right when he needed them and hold the board steady. You know how to build things? She asked. Some things, he said. My wife, she taught me most of what I know. You had a wife, Ellen? Yeah, she passed on about 5 years ago. Clara was quiet for a second. What was she like? Nathan drove a nail in, slow and deliberate. She was the kind of woman who could make any place feel like home. Didn't matter if it was a cabin, a tent, or the back of a wagon. If Ellen was there, you felt like you were home. He paused, the hammer hanging in his hand. I miss her every single day. Clara handed him another nail. I think she would have liked us. Nathan stopped what he was doing and looked right at Clara. This little girl had dragged her brother and sister through a blizzard, buried her own childhood in a cold root cellar, and now she was standing here passing him nails like it was the most natural thing in the world. Yeah, Nathan said, his voice a little thick. She would have loved you. Maggie started coming out to the ranch every other day. She'd bring food, clothes she'd sewn by hand, and books she borrowed from the church library. She kept a close eye on Jamie's lungs, which were getting better, slow but sure, and she'd sit with little Lily, teaching her how to stitch pretty patterns into scraps of cloth. Lily still wasn't talking much, but she was talking more. Just short little sentences, whispered questions. And one time a small little laugh escaped her when Maggie pricked her own finger with the needle and said a word you're not supposed to say in church. One afternoon, Nathan walked in from the barn and found Maggie in his kitchen. She was reading a book of frontier stories out loud to all three of the kids. Jamie was curled up on her lap. Lily was sitting right beside her, leaning against her arm, and Clara was on the floor, her back against the wall with her eyes closed, just listening. Nathan stood there in the doorway for a minute and just watched. Something about that scene just stopped him cold. It was the warmth of it, the pure and simple goodness of it. Just four people in a room with a voice filling the quiet with words from a book. For those few minutes, nobody was scared of anything. Maggie looked up and saw him standing there. She didn't stop reading, but a look passed between them. It was a look that said a whole lot more than either of them would have been comfortable saying out loud. Nathan hung up his coat, pulled up a chair at the table, and he just sat there and listened with them. Spring came on slow that year. The snow melted back an inch at a time, showing the brown earth and the little green shoots pushing their way up through the frost. The creek behind the ranch thawed out, and the sound of running water filled the air. Nathan spent his days fixing fences, looking after the horses, and clearing a little patch of land for a garden, something he hadn't even thought about doing since Ellen passed. Clara was right there helping him. For a 10-year-old girl, she had strong hands, and she wasn't scared of a little dirt or hard work. She was always asking questions. Questions about the soil, the seeds, the horses, and the war. Nathan answered every one of them, sometimes with words, and sometimes by just showing her how. "Papa never taught me about gardens," Clara said one morning while they were pulling weeds side by side. "We were always moving around too much. Your papa had other things to teach you." "Like what?" she asked. "Like how to survive," Nathan said, looking over at her. "How to keep your brother and sister alive. How to walk 100 miles through the worst blizzard in the territory and never give up." He looked her right in the eye. "Those are a whole lot harder lessons than gardening." Clara's tough little face softened up. "I guess so. And I'll teach you the garden part." She smiled at him then. A real smile, not that tight little almost smile she'd been wearing since she first showed up. It was a full-on, open-hearted 10-year-old smile that made Nathan's chest feel tight in the best possible way. Jamie got stronger with every passing week. His cough went away. The color came back to his cheeks. And by the time the last of the snow was gone, he was running. I mean, actually running across the yard, chasing that old barn cat, falling down, getting right back up, and falling all over again. He talked all the time about everything to anybody who would listen. He asked Nathan about the horses and the war and the stars. He asked why snow was cold, and if dogs could talk to each other, and what was inside a rock. Nathan answered every single question, even the ones he didn't know the answer to. "Nathan, why do birds fly south for the winter?" "Because it's warmer down there." "But why don't we fly south?" "Because we don't have wings." "But what if we did?" "Well then, I reckon we'd fly." Jaime thought about that for a minute. "I'd fly to where Papa is." Nathan's throat got real tight. He pulled Jaime up onto his lap and hugged him close. "Your Papa's not that far away, buddy. He's right here." He gently touched Jaime's chest right over his heart. "Right there." Jaime looked down at his shirt, then back up at Nathan. "Is Mama there too?" "Yeah, she's there too." "Is it crowded?" Nathan almost laughed, but he almost cried too. "No, son. Hearts have plenty of room." Jaime leaned his head against Nathan's chest, and that seemed to satisfy him. "Good. Because I want you in there too." Nathan just held him tighter and didn't say a word for a good long while. Lily bloomed the slowest of all, but she did bloom. She started talking more, sometimes in full sentences, but she still liked drawing the best. Maggie brought her a set of colored pencils from the general store, and Lily filled up page after page with pictures. She drew horses and trees and flowers. She drew the ranch house and all the people in it. Wow. She drew Nathan with his hammer and Clara working in the garden. She drew Jamie chasing that cat, and she drew Maggie, always Maggie, with her hair pinned up and her arms wide open. One evening, Lily brought one of her drawings over to Nathan. She just stood beside his chair, holding it out to him without saying a thing. Nathan took it from her and looked down. It was a picture of a family. 2 big figures and 3 little ones standing together in front of a house. And right above their heads, in shaky letters, she had written one word: home. Nathan looked up at Lily. She was watching him with those big, quiet eyes of hers. Eyes that had seen fire and death and so much fear, but had somehow found their way back to trust. "This is beautiful, Lily," Nathan said, his voice all rough. "It's us," Lily whispered. "I know it is." "Can we put it on the wall?" "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we sure can." He took down the rifle that hung over the mantel and put the drawing right there in its place. The rifle could stand in the corner. The drawing belonged right there. A letter finally came from the territorial governor's office late that spring. Nathan opened it at the kitchen table with Clara reading right over his shoulder because she'd earned that right. The letter made it official. All the claims against the Dawson estate had been dismissed. The mineral rights were now secured in a trust for William Dawson's children. And Garrett Wade, he'd been investigated and charged with fraud, extortion, and arson, but he had fled the territory before the marshals could get to him. "He's gone?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He's gone for good," Nathan confirmed. "He's a wanted man now. If he ever shows his face around here again, he'll go straight to prison." Clara read the letter again, real slow, as if the words might just disappear off the page. Then she put it down and looked at Nathan. "We're really safe." "You're really safe," he said. She didn't cry. Clara Dawson didn't cry. Not anymore. Not where anyone could see her. But her hand found its way to Nathan's arm, and she held on tight for just a second, and that 1 second was more than enough. That summer, Nathan asked Maggie to marry him. He did a real clumsy job of it, standing right there in the general store with a bag of flour in one hand and the words just sort of stumbling out of his mouth. "Maggie, I've been doing some thinking." "Well, that's a dangerous habit for a man like you, Nathan." "I'm serious." She put down the can of beans she was holding and looked him straight in the eye. "All right, I'm listening. You've been coming out to the ranch nearly every day, cooking and teaching and helping with the children. You brought Lily back to us. You taught Jamie his letters. You somehow made Clara believe she could be a kid again. I did those things because they needed doing." "I know," he said. "But I'm asking you to stay, not just for a visit, to stay for good." Maggie was quiet for what felt like a lifetime. She just looked at him. Really looked at him. The same way she had that very first day in the store, like she was taking his measure. "Nathan Cole," she finally said. "I've been waiting 3 months for you to say that." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." They got married in the little church in Alorn Creek, with Reverend Whitfield saying the words. Clara stood right up there beside Maggie, wearing a blue dress she'd sewn all by herself. Jamie carried the rings on a little pillow and only dropped them one time. Lily held a doll in one arm and held tight to Maggie's hand with the other. The whole town turned out for it. Wendell from the old store closed up shop for the day. The telegraph operator brought a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. Even a few ranchers Nathan had never said more than 2 words to rode in, tipped their hats, and wished them well. After it was all over, Clara found Nathan standing by himself on the church steps. "Nathan?" "Yeah? Can I ask you something?" "Always." Clara took a deep breath. "Can we, me and Lily and Jamie, can we call you something different?" Nathan looked down at her. "Like what?" Clara's eyes were bright and fierce, filled with every single thing she'd been carrying since that first night she showed up on his porch. "Like Pa." Nathan's vision went blurry. He had to press the palm of his hand against his eyes and take a breath that shook his whole frame. 5 years of silence. 15 years of guilt. A dead man's letter tucked in a boot. 3 little children showing up in a snowstorm. And now this girl, this brave, unbreakable girl, was standing right in front of him, asking if she could call him her father. "Yeah," Nathan said, his voice cracking right down the middle. And he didn't care one bit. "Yeah, Clara, you can call me that." Clara threw her arms around his waist and just held on. And as Nathan held her back, he felt it finally crumble away. That last wall. The one he'd built around his heart when Ellen died. A wall built up from years of loneliness, whiskey, and silence. "Come on down." "Pa," Clara said into his chest, just trying the word out, feeling the shape of it. It fit just right. The years went by. The ranch grew. Nathan built more rooms, a bigger barn, and a real kitchen. Maggie was the one who turned that house into a proper home. There were curtains in the windows, wildflowers on the table in the summer, and the smell of fresh bread always in the air. She ran the general store and the ranch like she was born to it, and not a soul in Illorn Creek was foolish enough to cross her in either place. Clara grew up tall and strong, with her father's fiery red hair and her mother's steady hands. By the time she was 15, she could outride nearly any man in the territory. She also had a knack for numbers that got the school teacher so excited he wrote a letter to a women's college back east. Clara went, she studied, and she came home to open the very first bank in Elkhorn Creek. Jaime grew up with his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle heart. He became an animal doctor, the only one for 100 miles around, and he traveled all over the territory looking after horses, cattle, and the occasional hard-headed mule. He married the school teacher's daughter and built a house just down the road from the ranch. Lily never did stop drawing. She went from using burnt sticks on brown paper to painting with oils on canvas. She studied with a painter who came through town one summer and saw she had a true gift. Her paintings ended up in galleries in Denver and San Francisco. They were pictures of the Wyoming frontier, of the people she loved, and of a world she had nearly lost and fought so hard to keep. She never forgot the fire. But she learned to paint other things, too. One autumn afternoon, many years later, all three of them came home for a visit. Clara brought her husband and 2 daughters. Jaime came with his wife and their baby boy. Lily brought a portfolio full of new paintings and a quiet smile that could still make Nathan's heart feel like it was breaking wide open. They all sat out on the porch, Nathan and Maggie right next to each other, with their children and grandchildren all around them. The land stretched out wide and golden in the afternoon sun. Jaime's oldest daughter took off running across the yard chasing a butterfly. Jaime called out to her, "Do not you go past the fence now." And for just a second, Nathan heard Will Dawson's voice in his son's words. Clara saw it on his face. She put her hand on Nathan's arm. "You all right, Pa?" "Yeah," he said, just remembering. "Papa, ready." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He would be so proud of all of this." Nathan looked around at the ranch, at the house he had built with his own hands, at the family that now filled it, at the land that Will Dawson had died to protect and that his children had lived to inherit. "I think about him every single day," Nathan said. "Every time Jaime laughs, I can hear him. Every time Lily draws a picture, I can see him. And every time you stand up for somebody who cannot stand up for themselves, Clara, that is your papa right there." Clara's eyes got shiny with tears. "And every time someone keeps a promise," she said, "that is you." Maggie reached over and took Nathan's hand. He held on tight. This was the hand that had bandaged his wounds, sewn his clothes, held his children, and built a life right beside him back when he thought he had given up on ever having one. "Thank you," Nathan said. He was not talking to Clara, or to Maggie, or to anyone else in the yard. He said it to the wind and to the sky, and to a good man who had written a letter and stuffed it in an old boot and trusted that it would find its way to the right person. That evening, long after everyone else had gone inside, Nathan sat on the porch by himself. The sun was going down, painting the whole world in shades of amber and gold. He reached into his shirt pocket, the very same pocket where he had once carried the letter he had carried for years, and pulled it out. The paper was soft and worn thin where it had been folded so many times. The ink was faded, but he could still make out the words. "Keep them safe, please. You are the only man I trust." Nathan folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. He closed his eyes and just let the quiet of the evening settle over him. He could hear his family inside. He heard Maggie's voice, Clara's soft laughter, Shamey's endless questions, and Lily humming an old song, one of the tunes their mother used to sing. He sat right there until the stars filled the sky and the night air turned sharp and cold, and the whole world went still. Then he stood up, put the letter back in his pocket, and went inside. He closed the door, shutting out the cold. Maggie looked up from the table and gave him a smile. Shamey crawled up into his lap. Lily proudly showed him a picture she had drawn. Clara poured him a cup of coffee. And Nathan Cole, the man who had spent 15 years running from a debt he thought he could never pay back, sat down at a table full of people who loved him, in a house that was finally a home. And he finally understood that some promises do not just end when you keep them. They become the foundation of the life you were always meant to live. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.